Chapter 1. The Cradle Between Two Rivers. Let your mind drift to a land cradled by two great rivers, where gentle currents glimmer under an ancient sun, and the quiet breath of history hums across endless plains. Imagine the soft light of a distant dawn touching a world that was still raw and untouched by cities, where the fertile soil glistened with promise and every breeze carried the scent of wet clay and wild grasses. This is the cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates, the sacred stretch of Mesopotamia, where the first humans began to leave their footprints upon the face of the earth. Picture those first settlers, arriving long before the grand empires and mighty kings, long before the songs of scribes and the chants of priests echoed in temple halls. They were simple people, drawn to these lush riverbanks by the promise of water and fertile ground. And as they paused here, they heard the gentle song of the rivers as they wove their way southward toward a distant sea. In these earliest days, they built their homes with their hands, shaping mud and reeds into walls that would shelter their children and kindle the first sparks of society. They learned to till the dark soil that these rivers gave life to plant seeds and wait as tiny green shoots unfurled beneath the warm gaze of the sun. Every morning they woke to the steady rhythm of these rivers, flowing as they had for centuries, flooding the land and then retreating, leaving behind rich silt that would forever change what people could grow, what they could dream. These were not yet cities of marble or stone, not yet places adorned with grandeur and gold. They were villages scattered along the water's edge, small clusters of humanity reaching toward the future, with hands that still remembered the wild. Days moved slowly then, measured by the rise and fall of the sun and the gentle lapping of the river at the muddy banks. Families huddled close in these first houses, listening to the soft murmur of frogs at dusk, the distant cry of birds returning to their nests as night settled like a dark, gentle shawl across the plain. Life was simple, yet profound in its meaning. They began to recognize patterns in the sky, to feel the rhythm of the seasons, turning with each breath of the earth. They watched the great rivers rise after the snowmelt far to the north, watched them flood their banks with a power that could destroy or renew, and slowly they learned to live in harmony with this power, to channel its strength with simple dikes and irrigation, channels dug with aching hands. Each scoop of soil was a quiet promise to their children that tomorrow would hold more than today. Time in those early years felt different, as if the rivers themselves set the pace. The people of this cradle learned patience, for the seeds they sowed took months to grow into crops that would fill their granaries. They learned to wait for the stars to change, to look for the bright eye of Venus in the morning sky or the soft glimmer of the Milky Way overhead. Beneath these glowing mysteries, they spoke to one another in voices low and warm, sharing myths of gods who slept in the rivers and spirits who walked the shores at twilight. Even then they felt the sacredness of this place, sensing that the rivers were more than water and soil, that they carried the breath of something eternal. In this gentle world of mud and reeds and water, humanity was finding its rhythm, discovering itself. Every village built here was a tiny hearth glowing against the dark, and together they formed a fragile chain of light along the banks of the rivers. Though these early people could not have known it, they were laying the first stones on the path toward a grand and intricate future. Within their hands rested the seeds of writing and law, trade and kingship, faith and art. though for now they thought only of the day's harvest and the promise of rain. They wove baskets and shaped clay pots, dug irrigation channels and built small shrines to thank the rivers that gave them life. With each generation, these first villages grew a little larger, a little bolder. The people learned to store surplus grain against leaner days, to trade simple goods with travelers who followed these same rivers as if drawn by a song. Slowly, their world expanded, and they began to recognize that they were part of something greater, that their hands and hearts could shape the world around them. The rivers continued to nourish them with rich soil and endless possibility, and in return they sang quiet lullabies to the rivers at night, honoring the bond that connected them all. Dawn would come again and again in this cradle between two great rivers, each sunrise glistening like a new thought across the horizon, stirring life into villages that would one day become cities, and stirring dreams into people who would one day call themselves kings. But for now, let us simply rest here, close our eyes, and listen as the gentle rivers flow on, carrying with them the soft whispers of a world just beginning to awaken. In this cradle between two rivers, humanity first learned to sleep, to dream, and to grow. And though countless years and countless stories would follow, those first whispers in the fertile crescent still hum like a gentle melody, waiting for us to hear them, as we to sink into a deep and peaceful slumber, wrapped in the timeless embrace of Mesopotamia. Chapter 2: From Villages to Sacred Cities. As the centuries unfolded beneath the warm skies of Mesopotamia, something remarkable began to happen along those fertile riverbanks, where small villages had once quietly clustered. Little by little, these early settlements took deeper root in the soil, reaching upward and outward as if they were answering a gentle call from the land itself. It was as though the rivers whispered encouragement into the ears of farmers and builders, inviting them to shape mud and clay into grander forms, to dream more boldly than they ever had before. At first it was hardly noticeable, just a few more houses built close together for company and safety, a few more hands lifting clay bricks into low walls. But as time passed, the villages began to grow in strength and number, becoming something more than simple collections of huts. Paths turned into streets, meeting places into squares, and wooden shrines into houses of prayer. The people could feel it in the rhythm of their days, in the sound of hammers and the murmur of market talk. They could sense a new energy stirring all around them, pulling them together into something that was larger and more enduring. Along the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris, names like Eridu, Uruk, and Yor began to take shape, names that would one day echo across the centuries. These places grew slowly, thoughtfully, as if each wall and doorway held a prayer that they might last forever. Farmers tilled the fields outside the growing cities, while craftsmen shaped pots and wove baskets within their walls. In the mornings, children chased one another across open courtyards as elders told stories about the gods who dwelled in the rivers and the skies. The heart of each new city was its temple, a sacred house built taller and taller as years passed, the people lifting mud brick upon mud brick toward the heavens in honor of the powers that guided their hands. These were the first great stepped towers that rose like hills made by human hands, their surfaces gleaming golden in the light of the setting sun. Within their sacred chambers, priests sang prayers and offered gifts of grain, beer, and oils, believing that by these acts they kept the balance between the worlds of mortals and the eternal. The cities took strength from this shared devotion, from the sense that they were part of a sacred order that embraced the rhythm of the rivers, the cycle of the seasons, the gentle rise and fall of life itself. And so the cities grew taller, their walls becoming a strong embrace that sheltered all who lived inside, farmers and potters, smiths and weavers, storytellers and priests. Each one played their part in this unfolding tapestry of life, and their voices blended into a single, gentle song that rose with the morning mist. Even as they built these first walls, the people never forgot that the rivers had first brought them here, and they honored those rivers with every brick they laid. The walls they built were more than mere defense. They were a declaration that they belonged to this place forever, that they had shaped this land as much as it had shaped them. Outside the walls, the harvests grew richer with every passing year, fed by careful irrigation and the river's endless gift of fertile silt. The world beyond those walls was immense and mysterious, but within them there was a kind of peace that spoke of belonging. Nights in these early cities were hushed and glowing with small lamps of oil, the gentle hum of life settling into sleep as guards kept watch over the gates, and the stars shimmered high above the temple towers. Within these sacred spaces, children were born and elders passed into the arms of their ancestors, while the steady breath of the river lulled everyone to rest. There was joy in these cities, and there was sorrow too, but all of it was stitched into the greater pattern of life they were weaving together. They created rules and traditions to hold their world together, and in their hearts they felt a sense of purpose that was deeper than words. Time moved onward like a patient current through these cities of clay and prayer. Years became decades, and decades became centuries. Yet always the rivers flowed, and always the people built, hoped, and dreamed. What had started as scattered villages had become sacred cities, where the pulse of community beat strong and sure beneath the Mesopotamian sun. Even as they reached upward toward the divine with their they kept their feet grounded in the rich soil that had nurtured them from the very beginning. And as we close our eyes tonight, we can almost hear the soft rhythm of those cities, breathing the gentle stirring of history as it began, one brick at a time, under the watchful gaze of gods and stars. The cities that rose between the rivers would never stop telling their story, and as we listen to their distant voices, we too become part of their long and gentle dream. Chapter 3. The scribe's clay birth of writing. In the soft light of morning, as gentle breezes whispered through the courtyards of ancient Mesopotamian cities, a new kind of magic began to take shape. It was not magic in the sense of spells or gods, but a quiet miracle all its own, the art of making thought visible. Imagine a scribe seated comfortably in the shade of a mud brick wall, his hands steady and sure as they press a reed stylus into a tablet of damp clay. Each tiny wedge and stroke carries meaning, a shape that will hold a word, a name, a number, long after the speaker's voice has faded into the warm, timeless air. This is the birth of writing, cuneiform, and it is the voice of a people who want to remember, to record, to understand their world more deeply than spoken words alone could allow. Before this time, people relied on their memories and on what they could pass along by voice and ritual. But life in these cities had become more complex. There were harvests to measure and trade to manage, temples to maintain and offerings to count, stories to preserve and laws to enforce. The need for something more lasting began to stir like a gentle tide, and so, bit by bit, scribes learned to scratch tiny shapes into clay, creating a language that could stand still in time. Picture a temple courtyard, where priests await the record of offerings brought in honor of their gods. A scribe bows his head and etches careful symbols into a tablet as the aroma of incense drifts through the air, and the distant murmur of a hymn rises like a heartbeat. Every stroke is deliberate, every mark a bridge between thought and form. Beyond the temple gates, a merchant leans against a wooden post, preparing to trade his grain for copper and cloth. With a scribe's help, he too can keep track of his agreements, tokens pressed into clay as evidence of his dealings, so that months from now, under a different sky and on a different day, these marks will speak for him, telling what was given and what was promised. Even the kings, seated on carved thrones in their grand halls, come to appreciate the power of this new craft. Laws can now be written down, chiseled into tablets so that justice may endure beyond the fleeting memories of those who heard it proclaimed. Royal decrees can be sent to distant cities without a messenger needing to memorize them. Treaties with neighboring rulers can be preserved forever in clay, so that their promises live on long after hands have clasped and parted. And what of the poets and dreamers, those who look up at the glimmering stars and wonder who they are and where they belong? They too come to see that writing offers a kind of immortality. Scribes begin to preserve hymns, myths, and epics, etching into clay the deeds of mighty heroes and the hopes of gentle hearts. The story of Gilgamesh and his quest for meaning, the songs to Inanna as she rises like the morning star, all find a home in this fragile yet enduring medium. Imagine the small hands of an apprentice, perhaps only a boy at first, kneading clay into smooth, flat surfaces as he watches a master scribe work with quiet precision, day after day, under the shade of a temple wall or in the warm light of a scribal school. He learns the shapes of the signs and the rhythm of their order. Slowly, he joins a tradition that will stretch far into the future, one that treasures the careful touch of the stylus and the softness of the clay that holds a world of knowledge. How strange and beautiful that something so simple as a lump of river clay can become a vessel for thoughts and feelings, laws and numbers, prayers and histories. Once the words have been pressed into its surface, the clay is left to dry, its surface hardening under the Mesopotamian sun. Within a few hours, what was once soft and easily shaped will have become strong and enduring, a tiny tablet that speaks with the voices of its makers across the centuries. These small pieces of clay, scattered in storehouses and libraries and sacred halls, become a kind of collective memory for an entire civilization. They bear witness to the rise of cities and the lives of everyday people, to grand ambitions and gentle hopes. And when we look upon these tablets today, cracked and worn and dug up from beneath the soil, we can still sense the care with which they were made. We can almost feel the hands that shaped them, and the minds that dreamed them into being. The birth of writing was more than an invention. It was a promise, a delicate pact between past and future. It ensured that knowledge would not vanish with the fading of a voice, or the closing of an eye. It allowed humans to speak to one another across time, to pass their wisdom onward like a torch glowing in the dark. And so, as night falls across these sacred cities and the fires burn low, we can close our eyes and imagine the sound of a stylus tapping gently into clay, each tiny wedge carrying the weight of a thought that will live forever. In that gentle sound is the first heartbeat of history itself, steady and sure, waiting for someone to listen. Chapter 4. kings beneath the stars. As the day gives way to a quiet, shimmering dusk and the first stars begin to glimmer, like scattered jewels across the darkening sky, let your thoughts travel to a time when kings walked these fertile lands as living bridges between the gods and their people. Picture a ruler seated upon a throne of carved wood and gold, the glow of 100 small oil lamps, casting soft light across his face as he gazes out at the gathered crowds. Here, beneath a velvet sky brushed with silver, these kings rose to lead their cities and to shape destinies, with hands that felt guided by divine will. The people around them believed that their kings carried a spark of something eternal, a fragment of the God's own power that guided them through triumph and hardship alike. When one of these kings spoke, his voice was like the voice of the rivers themselves, carrying a sense of purpose that ran deep into the hearts of all who heard him. And as they looked up at him beneath the stars, they felt that they too were part of something greater, swept up in a tide of history as ancient as the land beneath their feet. These were not mere warriors or judges, they were shepherds of their people, entrusted with the well-being of cities like your Uruk and Lagash. Every decision they made was a careful balance between justice and mercy, between tradition and change. They surrounded themselves with wise advisors and learned scribes who kept careful records of decrees and treaties, laws and debts. Yet they also relied on their own intuition and their sense of divine favor, knowing that if they ruled with humility and strength, the gods would smile upon their reign. Many of these kings proved themselves on the battlefield as well as the throne, driven by the need to protect their people and to secure precious resources. They led armies across the plains and into the hills, their banners caught in the warm desert winds. The clash of bronze and the cries of warriors echoed beneath these same stars that had witnessed the rise of cities centuries before. When the dust settled and the fighting ended, they returned home not only with victory, but also with the burden of responsibility heavier upon their shoulders. Every conquest brought new challenges, new people to rule, new traditions to understand, new oaths to honor. At times they dreamed of greatness beyond their borders, imagining empires stretching across the rivers and beyond the horizon. They longed to be remembered as more than mortal men. They wished to live forever in story and song, their names carved into stone as enduring as the hills themselves. And so they built monuments, commissioned statues, and raised palaces that glowed with painted murals of their greatest deeds. Within temple walls they poured offerings to the gods, who had granted them their authority, humbling themselves before these unseen powers even as they towered over their subjects. They made sure their laws were written into clay and their victories into stone, so that one day, long after their bodies had turned to dust, someone might look upon these words and remember them as they had hoped, as wise and mighty kings, who guided their people with hands both firm and caring. But these kings also knew the loneliness that can come with such power. On quiet nights, they might step out into a moonlit courtyard and look up at the sky, wondering if the gods truly listened, wondering if they were chosen or simply human like everyone else. Beneath the grandeur and the gold was a mortal heart that felt fear and desire, that hoped their children would live in a world as safe and promising as the one they had fought to protect. Some sought immortality in their lineage, passing the crown to sons and grandsons, teaching them the careful dance of ruling under these watchful stars. Others trusted in their laws, their inscriptions on clay and stone tablets that would outlast their fleeting reigns. They built cities so strong and so beautiful that they hoped their people would never forget the hands that raised them. Even as they aged and their strength began to fade, these kings kept their gaze upon the future and their ears attuned to the whispers of their ancestors. They understood that they were part of a greater rhythm, that every sunrise and sunset, every rise and fall of the river, carried a message they could only ever partly grasp. And so they ruled with as much compassion as they could muster, knowing that leadership was both a gift and a burden. Beneath the glimmering dome of the heavens, they sat in their halls and listened to the music of harps and lyres, to the hum of conversation and the gentle flow of the rivers outside. Theirs was a world of fleeting brilliance and enduring dreams, a fragile balance between power and humility. And as the light of the stars slowly traced their course across the sky, they hoped that their names would be carried onward by the people they had led and the cities they had built. Even as we close our eyes tonight and drift into sleep, we can almost hear their voices, the distant, gentle echoes of kings beneath the stars, forever reaching upward, forever looking toward a future they hoped would remember them kindly. Chapter 5. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a King's Quest. As the warm breath of the desert wind glides across the ancient plain and the last light of the day melts into the darkening sky, let your thoughts follow the trail of a story as old as the stars themselves. A story carried by the rivers and whispered among the reeds. A story that lives forever in the hearts of those who listen closely. This is the tale of Gilgamesh, mighty king of Uruk, and his search for the meaning of life and death. A journey that began with pride and ended in humility. Born of Mesopotamian soil and sorrow and friendship. Imagine the great city of Uruk, its walls glowing gold in the light of the setting sun, its streets alive with the sound of hammer and chisel, voice and laughter. Here reigned a king who was greater than all others, strong as a wild bull, beautiful and fierce, yet restless in his soul. Gilgamesh was a ruler who knew his strength but not his limits, who longed for something beyond his power and his wealth. Though he could not yet name it, the people of Uruk admired him, yet they feared him too, for his greatness could sometimes cast long shadows. They prayed for someone who might temper his restless heart, someone who could match him in spirit and strength, and their prayers were heard by the gods who dwell in sacred places. From the wild hills came Enki, shaped from clay and kissed by the breath of the goddess. Aruru, a man of the wilderness, as free as the beasts that roamed the hills. He drank from streams and ran with the gazelles beneath the glowing moon. Though born far from cities, Enkidu carried within him a spark that would change the destiny of kings and kingdoms. When at last these two met in the streets of Uruk, they wrestled like titans under the gaze of astonished crowds, each straining every muscle to overcome the other, until breathless and spent they recognized in one another a kindred soul. And so began a bond that ran deeper than blood, a friendship as strong as the walls of the city itself. Together they journeyed to distant places, chasing adventure beneath 100 unfamiliar skies. They faced Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, with his terrifying voice like a storm and his face like a mountain wreathed in mist. Side by side they fought this monstrous foe, their hearts beating in time with one another, their swords raised not only for glory but for the joy of sharing the trial together. In victory, they felt as though nothing in the world could touch them, as if they had reached up and taken hold of eternity itself. But eternity is a gift denied to mortals. and soon the hands of fate reach down to remind them that all who live must also one day die. The goddess Ishtar, humiliated by Gilgamesh's refusal of her advances, unleashed the mighty bull of heaven upon Uruk in her wrath. Again the two friends fought together, felling the beast with skill and daring. Yet this triumph could not keep sorrow at bay. The gods decreed that one must pay for their defiance, and it was Enkidu who fell sick and wasted away, his strength ebbing like water into dry ground, until at last his eyes closed forever. The death of Enkidu broke something deep inside Gilgamesh, shattered his certainty and left him trembling with a fear he had never known. Gone was the mighty king who thought himself invincible. In his place stood a grieving man who understood that all mortal lives end the same way, and that the walls of Uruk could not shield him from this most final of truths. Driven by a need to understand, to outrun the shadow that had claimed his friend, Gilgamesh embarked upon a quest that would carry him across mountains and deserts, across seas as dark as ink and paths lit only by the distant glow of unfamiliar stars. He sought out Utnapishtim, the one man who had survived the great flood and had been granted the gift of eternal life. On this arduous journey he faced many trials, his hands raw, his body exhausted, his heart aching with the burden of his questions. And though Utnapishtim spoke kindly to him, revealing the secrets of the flood and the gods' decrees, he could not give him what he most desired, a way to escape his own mortality. Even when Utnapishtim told him of a plant that could restore youth, and even when Gilgamesh found it hidden in the deep, fate had one last lesson to give. A serpent, silent and swift, stole the plant while Gilgamesh rested, leaving him empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Returning home to Uruk at last, his brow worn by wisdom and his eyes gentler than before, Gilgamesh gazed upon the walls he had built, and the city that had grown beneath them. Though he had not conquered death, he had come to understand that immortality is found not in endless years but in the works we leave behind and the love we bear for one another. Beneath the stars that had witnessed his story, Gilgamesh laid down his fears and embraced his humanity, knowing that even the mightiest of kings must one day sleep forever, and that the names we leave, etched in clay and stone and memory, can live on long after we are gone. And as we listen to this timeless tale tonight, carried on the gentle breath of a Mesopotamian breeze, we too may feel a quiet comfort stirring within us, the sense that though life is fleeting, friendship and compassion, courage and wonder can light our way like distant lanterns glowing in the dark. Chapter 6. Sargon's Dream, the First Empire. A soft wind carries the tale of Sargon, of a uniting city-states beneath a single banner. As a warm breeze glides across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, and the last rays of the day kiss the golden fields. Let your thoughts drift back through time to an age when a single dream began to stir the hearts of men. This is the story of Sargon of Akkad, a ruler who rose not from royal birth but from humble beginnings, a leader who dared to weave together the scattered city-states of his world into something greater than any one of them could have imagined. Picture the land as it was then, a mosaic of proud cities like Kish and Uruk, Nippur and Yor, each with its own walls and its own gods, each watching warily as its neighbors prospered or struggled. Rivalries ran deep and old grudges deeper still, and yet, into this landscape of tension and change, came a man whose name would one day be spoken with awe. Sargon had been found as a baby, so the legend says, set adrift in a basket on the river and saved by a gardener who raised him as his own. From those modest roots, he learned to read the currents of power as carefully as he had learned to read the rivers. And as he grew into a capable young man, strength and ambition glimmered in his eyes like the first light of dawn, when at last he took up arms and began his rise. It was not simply for conquest, but for a purpose that was larger and deeper. Sargon dreamed of bringing the warring cities together beneath one banner, of forging a single empire that could stretch across these rich lands and offer a measure of peace to all who called them home. Battle followed battle as Sargon and his warriors crossed rivers and marched across dry hills and fertile valleys, the clang of swords and the cry of trumpets echoing beneath the wide sky. Yet with each city he took, he treated the conquered not merely as spoils, but as part of a new whole, integrating them into his growing empire, and making them feel the weight of his promise. Though he was a conqueror, he was also a builder. Wherever his army passed, he left behind more than footprints in the dust. He left laws to bind the people together, trade routes to enrich them, and garrisons to protect the peace he had fought so hard to establish. City walls might bow to his might, but their markets soon bustled with new life, and their temples soon rang with new chants. For under Sargon the land began to breathe as one. Even the great rivers seemed to murmur of his name, as they carried boats laden with grain and copper, cedar wood and fine cloth to every corner of the empire. The empire that Sargon built was not merely one of power, but of connection. In these early days of empire, ideas and traditions began to travel as easily as merchants on their boats. Stories were exchanged in hushed tones around campfires and in bustling courtyards, and the gods of one city found their way into the hearts of people in another. Scribes set to work, their hands quick and sure upon the damp clay as they kept careful records of treaties and harvests, of royal decrees and offerings to the divine. Within this new order, people began to see themselves as part of something larger than the city walls that surrounded them. Sargon himself must have felt the weight of his dream as keenly as anyone. Though hailed as the great king of Akkad, though praised as a favorite of Ishtar and Enlil, he was also a man who knew that empires, like men, are mortal. In the quiet hours of the night, looking up at the vastness of the starry skies, he must have wondered whether the bonds he had forged would endure after he was gone, whether this fragile thing called empire could survive the ambitions of those who came after him. But those thoughts, like the gentle hush of the desert wind, passed in time, and Sargon pressed onward, determined to make his dream real. The years rolled by like the rivers that nurtured his empire, and as the cities settled into this new rhythm of peace and trade, as caravans moved unmolested across the land and farmers tilled their plots with a new sense of security, the people began to speak of Sargon less as a conqueror and more as a shepherd. They told their children of the king, who had taken the scattered sparks of these lands and breathed them into a single flame that burned bright across the plains. Even centuries after Sargon was gone, long after his bones had become dust and his name had been etched into the tablets of history, the dream he had dreamed would live on. Future kings would look back to him as a model, a reminder of what could be achieved by vision and resolve, by the courage to hold fast to an idea that transcended the narrow walls of any one city. And as we close our eyes tonight and let ourselves drift into gentle sleep, We can almost see him as he once was, a lone figure standing at the edge of a riverbank, feeling the cool touch of water against his feet, hearing the murmurs of 100 voices joined together as one, and knowing that from that single dream, an empire had been born beneath the eternal gaze of the stars. Chapter 7. Hammurabi's Code, Laws Carved in Time. As the deep blue of night settles gently across the hills and valleys of Mesopotamia, and the last embers of the day's light fade into the distant horizon, let your thoughts travel to the reign of a king, whose voice still whispers to us across thousands of years. This is Hammurabi of Babylon, a ruler whose name is forever bound to a single, enduring idea that justice and order must be more than fleeting hopes. They must be carved into time itself, etched into the very stones that make up the bones of his city and his empire. Picture Babylon at its height, its mighty walls aglow under the light of lanterns, its gardens stirring softly in the night air, markets have long since quieted, and yet in the minds of those who sleep within these walls, there is a sense of security, a feeling that there are rules that protect and bind their world together. And at the heart of this city stands a dark basalt, steely, upon which is inscribed the words of a king who listened as much as he spoke, a king who understood that to reign justly was to give his people something they could hold on to when life felt uncertain. Before Hammurabi's time, justice had often been carried like a shifting breeze, guided by local custom in the hands of whichever authority was nearest. But Hammurabi knew that a law cannot truly protect if it is not known, if it is not set down so that everyone, rich and poor, powerful and humble, can see it and weigh their actions against its measured lines. So he called together his scribes and had them press careful wedges into clay and chisel, careful signs into stone. Almost 300 laws, strong and stern, each one a lantern lighting a different path, a different way to resolve wrongs and settle disputes. These were not abstract words. They touched every part of daily life, bringing order to trade and agriculture, to family and property, to debts and wages and marriages. Hammurabi was not a distant figure, aloof from his people. He was a ruler who wished to look into their hearts and say, "You matter." That is why his code spoke in plain terms that all could understand. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. These words are harsh by modern ears, yet they spoke to a deeper need, the need for fairness in a world where imbalance could destroy communities. These laws recognized that every action has a consequence, that every wrong must meet its proper redress, so that society could continue, like a great wheel turning smoothly through the years. Yet Hammurabi also knew that justice is not without compassion. Within these laws we can hear an understanding that the weakest must be shielded from the strongest, that widows and orphans deserve care, that a fair price is owed for fair work. The stele that bore his code was not just a record of punishments. It was also a promise that even those without voice or wealth could call upon the king's justice, like a shelter in a storm. Imagine him standing there one evening, hands pressed against the cold stone as he looks upon his work. Perhaps he wondered if his words would live forever, if these careful laws would help his people sleep more peacefully at night. The city around him breathed slowly, the soft murmur of a river far away. The gentle creak of wooden carts settled into rest. Hammurabi knew that the true power of his code would not lie in fear but in trust. Trust that this shared understanding of right and wrong would keep Babylon strong. trust that his successors would honor these laws and uphold the fragile balance between mercy and judgment that he had so carefully shaped. In the years that followed, Hammurabi's code was copied and studied in scribal schools, read aloud in halls of justice, and invoked whenever someone cried out for fairness. Even after Babylon fell to other hands and other empires rose and vanished like footprints in the dust, the idea of this code remained, carried onward like a bright torch through the long halls of history. And as we listen tonight, in the deep hush between one breath and the next, we can sense the weight of Hammurabi's dream, the quiet, the resolve of a king who believed that order could rise from chaos, if only someone dared to carve it into being. It reminds us that laws are more than words. They are the heartbeat of a just society, a rhythm that steadies us as we navigate the unpredictable currents of our own lives. So let your eyes grow heavy as you drift further into sleep, knowing that once, under these same endless stars, a king stood before a pillar of stone and spoke for his people. Let the gentle certainty of that voice, carried softly across centuries of time, soothe your thoughts and hold you safe tonight. Hammurabi's code, etched into stone and whispered into eternity, continues to light our way long after the lamps have gone out. Chapter 8. The ziggurats touch the sky. As dusk settles over the fertile lands of Mesopotamia and the last rays of the sun slip behind the distant hills, let your thoughts rise slowly like the great stairways that lead up to the those ancient towers of clay and brick that seem to grow straight from the soil, reaching ever upward as if to brush the glowing light of the stars. The air is hushed here in these sacred precincts, and the very stones seem to hum with quiet purpose, built by hands guided by faith and wonder long ago. Picture yourself walking across the smooth courtyards that surround these temples, feeling the warmth of the day still held in the worn tiles beneath your feet. The scent of incense drifts on the breeze, rich and sweet, and the muted sound of distant chants carries like an embrace across the gathering twilight. Everywhere you look, there is the sense that you stand between two worlds, one grounded firmly in the labor and devotion of countless builders, the other shimmering just above, where gods and goddesses dwell and gaze down from the deep blue heights. These ziggurats are more than mere structures. They are bridges built by mortal hands to span the immeasurable distance between heaven and earth. Layer by layer, brick upon brick, they rise like sacred hills conjured into being, their grand terraces catching the light, so that they seem to glow softly even after the sun has disappeared. And at the very top, high above the murmur of the city and the restless breath of the plain, is a sanctuary, a place where priests light oil lamps that burn through the night and offer their prayers into the vast dome of stars overhead. Imagine climbing one of these stairways yourself, each careful step bringing you closer to that glowing sanctuary, closer to the sky. The world below begins to shrink as you ascend, the houses and gardens of the city becoming small and still, like tiny shapes arranged across a quiet map. You feel a breeze caress your face, cooler and clearer the higher you climb, as if the air itself grows lighter in the company of the gods. By the time you reach the summit, the city is far beneath you and the temple doors stand open, spilling golden light across the terrace stones. Within, sacred chants rise and fall like a tide, and the soft rhythm of drums and bells weaves a delicate melody into the night. Here, beneath a roof of carved cedar beams and painted panels, A priest bows before the altar, and the offerings, dates and grain, bowls of water and fragrant oils are placed with gentle hands, as if to nourish both the gods and the hopes of those who live far below. In these ziggurats, the boundaries between the human and the divine seem to vanish into the softness of the dark. Night birds glide soundlessly overhead, and the stars wink and shimmer as though they listen to, leaning closer to catch every prayer and every whispered wish. Perhaps those who built these towers believed that by creating a stairway to the sky they might draw the attention of gentle powers who could guide their harvests and shelter their children. And as they gazed up into that swirling ocean of light, they must have felt something stirring, a sense that they were part of a greater story that spanned across eternity. Even after centuries have passed, and the towers have weathered countless suns and moons, their grandeur has not diminished. They still stand, solid and proud, their footprints pressed into the very soul of the land, their shapes echoing in the hills beyond the rivers. Though the hands that built them have long since returned to the soil, the ziggurats remain as watchful sentinels who keep their quiet vigil over the cities they once rose above. And tonight, as you close your eyes and sink into gentle dreams, you too can feel the hum of these ancient towers stirring in your thoughts. They remind you that even the most fleeting of lives can leave a lasting mark if built upon devotion, care, and the desire to reach toward the light. So breathe deeply and let the soft hush of these sacred places soothe you like a lullaby, until sleep carries you gently upward, up the winding stairways of memory, up toward the glowing heights, where earth and sky embrace and the timeless ziggurats touch the sky forever. Chapter 9. Assyria's silent conquerors. As the winds shift and the landscape tilts toward the distant hills and valleys of the north, let your thoughts travel across the broad sweep of Mesopotamia to the heart of a people whose will and ambition would leave a profound mark upon these ancient lands. This is the story of the Assyrians, whose kings rose like iron pillars against the dark skies of uncertainty and built mighty cities, whose grandeur would echo across the centuries. Picture a city like Nineveh, its walls towering and strong, its gates adorned with guardian beasts and intricate carvings that catch the light of morning like a promise. Here, palaces gleam with polished limestone and murals painted in deep, rich colors tell of royal hunts and processions, of winged spirits and mighty kings who called themselves shepherds of the world. These monarchs ruled with a sense of purpose as sharp as their swords, carrying their power outward, along great roads and across deserts and hills, until few dared to stand against them. Wherever the Assyrian army marched, the ground seemed to tremble beneath its disciplined ranks, and banners bearing the emblem of the king unfurled like fierce wings in the desert wind. They built an empire that stretched like a vast mosaic of cities and peoples, held together by the weight of their authority and the swift strengths of their warriors. Yet, though they were conquerors who inspired fear, they were also visionaries who understood that knowledge was as powerful as might. Within the halls of their palaces, they preserved the wisdom of the past, entire libraries filled with clay tablets, their careful wedges recording epics and myths, treaties and royal decrees, spells and stargazers' charts. Imagine a quiet room deep inside one of these palaces, the glow of a single lamp spilling across shelves where thousands of tablets rested. Scribes bent over their work, fingers moving with practiced care as they etched the wisdom of centuries. into damp clay that would one day dry and harden like tiny pieces of history itself. It was a fragile sanctuary built within the heart of a powerful empire, a place where kings hoped to grasp eternity by collecting all that was known, so that long after they were gone, someone might look back and remember. The Assyrians also built cities of beauty and ore halls, with carved columns reaching upward like trees, gates guarded by colossal stone lions with wings, and gardens that flourished even in the heat of summer, their green terraces spilling like waterfalls. In these places, nobles and commoners moved together, through courtyards filled with the scent of myrrh and the sound of fountains, their eyes drawn upward to reliefs that told the grand tale of their people's rise. But beneath this splendor ran the currents of struggle and hardship that shaped the empire. Kings rose to power through skill and strength, yet they walked always in the shadow of wars fought and treaties made, knowing that their throne was never entirely secure. Even as they ruled with firm hands, they knew that power could shift like desert sands beneath them. And so they left their names chiseled into stone and their deeds celebrated in songs and inscriptions, hoping that these might endure where flesh could not. And as they gazed up at the same starry skies that had watched Sumerians and Akkadians before them, they understood that their time too would pass, that they were part of a greater rhythm, and that every empire must one day face its own dusk. Still, they built, they fought, they wrote, and they dreamed, determined to leave behind a legacy as strong as their walls. Even long after the last Assyrian king had vanished into history and their palaces had crumbled into dust, the spirit of what they created lingered like a faint glow in the dark, reminding those who followed of what it meant to dare greatly. And tonight, as you close your eyes and let these distant echoes settle around you like a gentle hush, you may sense their presence to these proud, unyielding builders and warriors who sought to shape the world around them, who etched their aspirations into clay and stone so that someone, someday, might look up and wonder at the heights they reached and the depths of their resolve. Let their story wash over you like the warm breath of an ancient wind, until at last you drift into sleep with the quiet assurance that even the most fleeting of empires can leave footprints on the long, winding path of time. Chapter 10. The Gardens of Babylon. As the silver light of the moon drifts softly across the darkened plain and the stars wink like scattered jewels in the velvet skies, let your thoughts wander to a city that glows with a quiet majesty in this enchanted hour. Babylon, aglow in its golden age, here at the very heart of the desert, rises a miracle built by human hands and guided by the king's great dream, Nebuchadnezzar's fabled gardens. Imagine stepping beneath an archway carved with lions and rosettes, feeling the cool hush of the night embrace you as you enter this green sanctuary. Before you stretches a world that defies the arid land beyond its walls, a world of lush terraces and flowering vines that seem to spill like emerald waterfalls from one level to the next, each one higher than the last until they vanish into the starry night. Even the gentle breath of the breeze feels different here, rich with the scent of myrrh and jasmine, mingled with the fresh sweetness of fig and date, of pomegranate blossoms kissed by dew. Every path you follow is dappled with light and shadow, lanterns glowing softly between the trees as water glimmers in marble pools. Small streams trickle alongside your feet, their song weaving a melody that feels both tender and eternal, as if these gardens exist outside of time itself, No one who has stood here could ever doubt the skill and devotion that shaped them. Channels that draw water upward to nourish every vine and petal. Terraces carefully braced with stone and brick to hold the weight of green and bloom. Arches and columns crowned with painted tiles that glint like jewels in the dark. Even the birds that roost here seem to dream more sweetly, their plumage glowing faintly in the moonlight as they nest among fragrant boughs. From high terraces, you can see the glimmer of Babylon's streets and walls, the gentle curve of the Euphrates winding past the city like a silver ribbon. The grand ziggurat of Marduk rises against the horizon like a solemn mountain, its summit kissed by light. From these heights, the city feels timeless, and you can almost hear the distant hum of voices, merchants and craftsmen, singers and priests, their hopes and labors entwined with the very stones of this splendid place. Here, in these gardens, you sense the soul of a city that has thrived through the centuries. A place shaped by the hands of a king who wished to honor his queen with a living gift, one that would stand forever as a promise of beauty and devotion. Nebuchadnezzar, mighty and yet tender in his way, looked upon these terraces with pride, seeing in every vine and leaf the dream of a gentler world, where even in the harsh heart of empire something delicate and green could flourish. And as you wander through this nocturnal paradise past statues, wreathed in ivy and carved benches tucked beneath sheltering palms, you feel that same dream stir gently inside you. Time seems to slow, the very air shimmering with memories of those who came before. Dancers who once moved like shadows under these lanterns, scholars who paused in quiet reflection, children who laughed as they chased fireflies through these winding paths. Every corner hums with life, every petal glows with its own quiet light, even as centuries pass and Babylon's towers become dust, even as the voices of its kings and citizens grow faint with the turning of years. The gardens remain forever vivid in the mind of place, where wonder took root and blossomed, a fleeting treasure carried on the breath of history. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the world around you melts into gentle sleep, hold this vision close. Let the beauty of these gardens, glowing under Nebuchadnezzar's golden rain, sink into your thoughts like a warm breeze. Let the sound of water and the softness of green soothe you, until at last you drift into dreams as gentle and eternal as Babylon's gardens, forever suspended between the brilliance of the past and the hush of the quiet night. Chapter 11. The last gates close, as the soft light of dusk settles across the plains and the desert. Winds sigh through empty streets. Let your thoughts travel one last time to the ancient cities of Mesopotamia as they stand on the threshold of change. Picture Babylon in this tender light, its grand walls glowing amber against a darkening sky, its gates towering and still, its gardens rustling gently as if whispering farewells to the ghosts of the past. This is the twilight of an age, a fleeting moment balanced between all that has been and all that is yet to come. Within these walls, where so many kings and common folk once walked together beneath banners and blazing torches, a hush has begun to settle. The towers that once echoed with song and celebration stand in gentle silence. The bustling markets have grown quiet, their rich scents and bright colors faded into memory. Even the mighty ziggurat, that stairway to the gods, now seems to gaze upward as if awaiting some final sign in the fading light. On this eve of empire, the people know that change is near. Rumors ripple like the currents of the great rivers. Tigris and Euphrates, and speak of a new power riding toward them, a conqueror whose name carries across the land, like distant thunder, Cyrus the Great of Persia. Already his banners have been sighted beyond the horizon, his soldiers moving with a sure and steady purpose that cannot be denied. And though the walls of Babylon rise high and proud, the hearts within them feel the weight of what is to come. Yet as we draw close to this quiet turning point, it is not fear that rises here, but a kind of deep, contemplative peace. The people of these cities, Babylon and Nineveh, and all the places that shaped this cradle of civilization, have witnessed countless nights like this one. They have known the rise and fall of kings, the sweep of armies across their lands, the triumphs and losses that together wove the long story of their lives. They have built and rebuilt their homes upon these ancient foundations and carved their memories into clay so that someone, someday, might remember them, even as the last sun slips beneath the horizon and the skies grow rich with the blue of night. These voices do not fade. They simply become softer, like a breath held between worlds. And so it is that Cyrus enters Babylon not with flame or destruction, but with a measured grace that speaks to his understanding of all that came before him. The gates, once barred and unyielding, are eased open. The city yields not in fear, but in the quiet knowledge that its story will live on in new hands. Here walks a king who knows the value of history, one who will honor the gods of these cities and leave their temples standing as testaments to the endurance of spirit and stone. And as Cyrus passes through these ancient streets, lanterns burn dimly in windows and shadows stretch long across cracked paving stones. Even the river murmurs gently against its banks as though it too acknowledges this changing tide. The last scribes and scholars bow their heads as they pen their final records of this chapter, their hands moving carefully across clay tablets that will sleep beneath the soil long after their own voices have grown silent. Tonight, as we listen to the far-off cries of watchmen and feel the cool breath of the desert night, we stand at the gates one last time and look back on all that these cities have given, their ziggurats and gardens, their codes and myths, their emperors and laborers, their gods and stories spun into countless shapes across centuries. It is all here in this single hushed hour, poised forever in the borderland between yesterday and tomorrow. And though new empires will rise and new rulers will carve their names into these hills and riverbanks, the spirit of Mesopotamia endures. It lingers in every stone and shard of pottery, in every whispered name and starry legend carried on the breeze. So as sleep draws you gently into its embrace tonight, let your thoughts settle upon this twilight and feel its quiet strength. Let it remind you that all things pass, yet all things leave their mark. And even as the last gates close and Babylon's voice fades into the hush of the centuries, you may sense it still, like the faintest murmur on the edge of dreaming, the enduring heartbeat of this ancient world, forever alive beneath the silver light of countless stars. Chapter 12. The Legacy Beneath the Dust. As the last light of evening melts into the embrace of the stars and the desert, hush settles gently across the sleeping world. Let your thoughts drift one final time across the land that cradled the first glimmers of civilization. This is Mesopotamia, a place that began with the simple currents of two rivers and grew into a grand stage upon which humanity learned to dream, to create, to shape its world, and to record its hopes and fears upon clay and stone. Beneath these quiet hills and sands lie the footprints of cities and palaces, the shattered pieces of painted pots and delicate seals, and the faint imprint of hands that built the walls, tilled the soil, and pressed letters into damp clay as they gazed up at the same moon that watches over you tonight. Though thousands of years have passed since the first villagers rose between the Tigris and Euphrates, their voices still reach us in gentle echoes as persistent as the wind that sighs through the reeds, as enduring as the stars glimmering overhead. Within those voices we can still sense the breathless wonder of early farmers who first understood the power of these rivers to give life. We can almost hear the soft scrape of styluses as they recorded harvests and songs and laws on tablets that would outlast empires. We can sense the quiet awe of people who built towers, reaching upward like hands hoping to touch the divine. The legacy of Mesopotamia is written not only in these surviving stones and stories, but also in the very way we live and understand the world even now. Every time we set pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, we follow the path first trodden by the scribes of yore and Babylon. Every time we gather in cities where strangers become neighbors, we trace the outlines of a pattern first woven in those ancient streets. Every time we marvel at a starry sky and wonder at the fates written in its glowing trail, we join a lineage of dreamers who once climbed sacred towers and looked up, just as we do, seeking meaning in the vast and mysterious darkness. These people who came before us, kings and builders, scribes and weavers, priests and dancers, have long since returned to dust. Yet what they began endures like a song carried across a still lake, the melody drifting onward through centuries, held and shaped by each new generation that listens and remembers. They remind us that even the grandest empires must eventually pass into the arms of the earth, and that it is what we leave behind, our ideas, our compassion, our art, our striving toward what is good and lasting that truly shapes the future. So tonight, as you feel the softness of sleep drawing you deeper into its embrace, take comfort in knowing that you too are part of this long and unbroken story. You stand at the far end of a path that began long ago between these rivers, and your thoughts and deeds add to the rhythm that began with hands pressing into wet clay, with eyes lifting toward the sky, with hearts reaching out to one another across the face of the world. Let the distant hum of that past soothe you as you drift into dreams, and let the gentle strength of this legacy shelter you, even beneath the dust of time. These whispers live on, they live in us, a quiet, enduring light that shines forever across the dark and the silence, and guides us like a patient star into the embrace of a peaceful and well-earned rest.